Adam Ragusea, talented home chef and YouTuber who a few days ago released a Texas-style brisket video. So as a devoted student to low and slow barbecue, I'm gonna watch his video and let you know if I think his recipe is worth its salt. Also, at the end of Adam's video, he said the following.
And if any pitmasters out there have purely dogmatic objections to what I've done today, well, please keep those to yourself. But if you have some, helpful comments, go for it.
So I promise no dogmatic dribble, just helpful, friendly advice in this video. Okay, so off the bat, he has some money shots of the brisket, and before I critique anything, I'm gonna say that this is not bad for a first-time brisket. Seriously, just from what I'm seeing, if someone served this to me, I would definitely eat it. However, there are definitely some problems that I'm seeing just from this footage alone. So I'm noticing that the crust or bark is really uneven. It's like super dark on one side, no bark at all in the middle, and then there's some bark on the other side. And the texture looks really bad in my opinion. Smooth and rubbery looking, almost like it's whale skin. The fat looks really well rendered, which is actually one of the most important parts of doing a brisket correctly. But man, the meat looks so dry in these shots. It almost looks like it's chicken breast or something. So I'm hoping that this video isn't too heavily edited so that we can see how these problems came to be.
Brisket is awesome and traditional. It's the pectoral muscle of the cow, and I highly recommend starting with only a half brisket.
So this is actually really good advice for beginners because the hardest part about smoking a brisket is basically preparing, trimming, seasoning, and cooking really well both parts of the brisket. So basically by separating the two muscles, you end up making this process way easier.
Just salt and pepper, a very thick coating of both. Sometimes people put on so much pepper that the surface tastes kind of pasty once cooked. I'm not into that.
All right, first of all, I don't know what he means by a pasty taste, so I can't really make a comment about that. But if he's putting less pepper on the brisket for his own personal preference, there's nothing wrong with that. But personally, I would have put way more pepper than he's putting on. It is really hard to over pepper a brisket because it's just such a big piece of meat. And that crust or bark on the outside of the brisket with a good pepper coating is so good, not only in terms of the texture, but the flavor too.
You can either season right before smoking, or in this case, I'm doing it the night before.
So I think seasoning overnight is a great thing to do, especially if you're not cooking with an offset smoker, which has really good convection. Because by seasoning overnight, the salt will draw the moisture out of the meat, and then it will reabsorb into the meat, leaving the surface of the meat very dry. And that dryness will help speed up the bark formation when you're cooking your brisket.
Disposable aluminum pans are extremely useful for barbecue. I'll stick it onto the bottom grate over to one side and it'll help contain my charcoal. If I didn't have the pan, I would use some bricks or some rocks to contain the charcoal over on this side.
This is actually a really big brain play by Adam here, because when I first got my kettle, I bought a $70 attachment called the Slow and Sear, and essentially Adam setup is doing exactly the same thing for like no cost.
The idea is to have a thin line of charcoal and the fire will slowly burn across that line.
Okay, so great strategy, and conceptually, Adam's got the right idea here for low and slow cooking. But those wood pieces are way too big and way too close together to pull off what he's trying to do. The way he has his pit set up, once one of those wood chunks lights, the other ones will light up shortly after, and his low and slow cook is gonna turn into a hot and fast one really quick.
People debate fat side up versus fat side down. I'ma split the difference and flip it halfway through.
Okay, so most people say you should cook your brisket with the fat cap facing the heat source. But me, in terms of the cooking process, I don't think it really matters as long as you know what you're doing with the cooker that you're using. Personally, I like to go fat side up no matter what cooker I'm using, because when I'm ready to slice the brisket, I like to cut it when the fat is on the top, not at the bottom. With that said, flipping the brisket in the middle of the cook is a pretty bad idea because, like I said before, he put very little pepper on this brisket, so during this maneuver, he's gonna lose even more. Also, now he's gonna get grill marks on both sides of the meat and mess up the bark on both sides, so there's not gonna be a good presentation side when he's slicing it. The much better play would be to rotate the brisket 180 degrees during the cook. That way, both sides of the brisket can be directly next to the heat source, and that way the whole thing can cook evenly.
The wood is burning way too hot and way too fast. Smoldering wood makes more sense smoke. We fix this problem by depriving the fire of oxygen.
For the cooker that he's using, smoldering wood is optimal, like Adam's saying, but it's not because it produces more smoke. I'm not gonna get too deep into the science, but basically the cooker that Adam's using doesn't have the space to build a hot enough or large enough coal bed or enough airflow to burn chunks cleanly. In order to produce the good smoke and smoke flavor that you would want from full combustion of wood chunks. I said I wasn't getting into the science, and now I am. Okay, so for those of you who are interested in the full explanation of the science of smoldering wood, I'll have a video linked in the description below from Pitmaster Harry Sue as he goes over all of the scientific background on smoldering wood. The better setup here would be to put the wood chunks under the coals, and that's actually a tip that I learned from Pitmaster Harry Sue. So not only will this help to restrict the airflow to the wood chunks, giving us that smoldering I was just talking about, but it'll also keep the flames from the wood chunks away from the brisket so it doesn't scorch the side of it.
I will choke off the bottom and top vents until the ambient temperature inside stabilizes between 225 and 250 Fahrenheit. That's 107
No chance. With the amount of fuel he has in that cooker, there is no way he's gonna be able to maintain the temperatures at 225 to 250 because those big chunks of wood are gonna cause massive temperature swings. Just looking at the relative size of the wood from this video, I think he's gonna be a lot closer to 300 degrees Fahrenheit and probably over, even with all of the vents like near shut.
After an hour or so, I need to replenish my fuel. They make grates with little trapdoors in them.
Where is he getting these wood chunks from? There's some like massive Jurassic Park wood stumps. Dude, just look at how much fire is coming out of his fuel. There is no smoldering going on right now.
After the brisket has been smoking for 3 or 4 hours, this is when you traditionally wrap the brisket up.
3 or 4 hours? Come on, man. Come on. Come on, man. There is no chance you cook this brisket for 3 to 4 hours at 225 to 250 and the crust is that dark. So either your time is off or your temperature's off, and I'm guessing because of how much fuel you have inside of your cooker, it's probably the latter. So if you guys are out there following Adam's recipe and you're able to lock in your kettle's temperature at 225 to 250, do not go to the next step after 3 to 4 hours because your bark and your brisket in general is not going to be ready for the next step. At those temperatures, it would take at least 8 hours to get that dark. This looks like a decent time to wrap the brisket. Usually one of the biggest beginner mistakes that I see is that people wrap their brisket way too early. So this looks pretty good. I love how he's wrapping it on the floor. That's totally me.
Braise it in its own juices until it's just barely fork tender. I'll just go by how the thermometer feels as I plunge it into the meat.
That's actually really good advice right there. That's like pitmaster level technique. Don't go off of the temperature, but how the meat feels. Good job, Adam.
This is a little overcooked.
No, that is not a little overcooked. That is very overcooked.
It's a little too soft for my taste and a little dry, but you know, it really doesn't matter because it's very fatty and you generally eat it with wet things. Pickles are the traditional accompaniment, but if you wanted to use some barbecue sauce, I won't tell on you.
Personally, I don't believe in barbecue sauce on brisket, but that brisket desperately needs it. Okay, so Adam actually cooks the other half of the brisket, which is called the point as well. So this cut is a lot fattier than the flat that he cooked earlier. Also, he's gonna leave half of the point untrimmed just to show at the end of the cook what too much fat on a brisket looks like. So just FYI, do not trim like this. And he's cooking this brisket this time on a propane grill, and he actually does something I've never seen before, but I think this is a really cool idea. Basically, he's gonna line up wood chunks along the flavorizer under the cooking grates and turn on the furthest burner. And the hope here is that the wood chunks will ignite slowly, one by one, throughout the entire cook. Now, I'm not kidding when I say this. I love the creativity and approach here, but unfortunately, this is not gonna work. Since the wood chunks are so close together and their moisture content is so low, as soon as one ignites, the rest of them are gonna follow very shortly after. And Adam actually prevents this during the cook by pouring water on the lit chunks once they ignite. But by doing this, the other wood chunks down the line are never gonna ignite. They're just gonna sit there sad and soggy. Just using his idea, I think that the better approach would be to put one chunk of wood on the flavorizer and then place the brisket in the furthest corner away from the wood chunk. And then put a water pan in between with either water or sand in it to basically protect the brisket from the radiant heat from the wood chunk. It probably would have made his cooker a little hotter, like closer to the 300 degree Fahrenheit mark, which is a lot hotter than the 225 he was targeting. But 300 degrees Fahrenheit isn't even close to the danger zone when it comes to brisket. Seriously, you can cook a brisket at 400 degrees Fahrenheit and it'll be fine as long as you know what you're doing. And that's the theme of barbecue in general. It's easy and there's a million ways to do it as long as you know what you're doing.
You maintain that target ambient temperature and smoke until the meat has a nice dark brown bark on it. I don't think you even really need to take the temperature inside the meat. When it looks like that and the juice is really pooling on top, you've probably hit the stall.
Wow. Didn't even temp it. Look at Adam, man, so inspirational. Yes, the eye test is a great one to use to see if your brisket is ready to wrap, but another one you should use in tandem is the feel test. So before wrapping, you just have to push your finger on the fat cap, and if the fat is nice, squishy, and sticky, you know it's ready to wrap. I also appreciate that he didn't use butcher paper and used foil this time, because honestly, it doesn't matter which one you use, as long as you know what you're doing. I'm sorry, guys. I just don't want to go on a tangent on how to know what you're doing for each of these scenarios because I know most of you don't care. But for the few of you that are interested, I'll have my beginner brisket guide and my advanced brisket guide that goes into depths on all of these little tricks and secrets about brisket in the description below.
If I'd cook this a little bit less, it'd be juicier.
It is crazy how bad this point looks. It has no bark whatsoever. It looked way better before he wrapped it, which if you guys are using foil wrapping to cook your brisket or cook anything, just make sure that you cook it past the stall so that there's not a lot of moisture left in the meat so that it won't pool inside of the wrapping and then wash off all your bark. Also, as you can see, this point end is super dry, just like his flat, which shows again that he overcooked it. But if this happens to you, you should do exactly what Adam is doing and cut your slices super thin. It's a similar trick to what delis do when they slice your meat super thin and then you're able to put it in a sandwich and you don't have to like tear it with your teeth. As many problems as Adam's brisket had, I would much rather eat his brisket than Joshua Weissman's Texas brisket that he made in his video. So make sure to watch the next video on your screen so you can see me react to just how bad Josh's brisket was, and I'll see you guys over there.